Welcome to Generation Inspired, exploring the people and ideas shaping tomorrow.
What if one of the biggest myths we've ever been told is that school is the best way for children to learn? Today's guest is Dr. Peter Gray. He's a psychologist, researcher, and author of the best-selling book Free to Learn. Now, for decades, Peter has studied how children actually learn when they're given something that most schools rarely allow, which is freedom. So that freedom to explore, to play, to follow their curiosity. And what this research shows is so fascinating. When young people are trusted to direct their own learning, they often become more motivated, capable, and resilient than we ever imagined. So, if we want a generation that can think for themselves, adapt to change, and solve real problems, maybe the real question isn't how we improve school. Maybe it's whether we need to rethink it altogether.
Today, as you just heard, we are here with the amazing Peter Gray. Welcome, Peter.
Well, thank you for having me here. It's nice to be here.
Oh, thank you. And, as a parent who has definitely been dragged through the trenches with my son in schooling, and actually as someone that has gone out there over the last few months and been investigating, all of the different alternative schooling options, this is going to be really interesting, I feel, as a chat. And I know that the research and your work is just amazing and it spans for years. But I thought I would love to start by going all the way back in time to the pivotal moment in your life that kind of started you on this path. And I have to say here, as a parent that has ended up in a principal's office quite often, this resonates. So would you like to just start us there on that day in the principal's office and we'll hear the story?
Sure. This is a story I tell near the beginning of my book, Free to Learn, and it truly is what led me to the path of research that I've been on now for quite a number of decades. So this was a long time ago. But I was a young professor at Boston College doing neuroscience, studying the binding of certain hormones in the brains of rats and mice, very different kind of research that I eventually became more passionate about. So meanwhile, I had a young son who had been quite happy, seemed to be a well-adjusted boy up until when he started school. And then we lived near what was everybody regarded as a very fine suburban public school. He went to that school. Beginning in kindergarten, he would come home and say how much he hates it, that it's prison, that we're sending him to prison,
Oh, wow.
And so we heard that, and we tried to just talk him out of it, his mother and I. We weren't thinking about any kind at that time, homeschooling, other options were not particularly available, and homeschooling wouldn't have been a good option for us for a variety of reasons anyway. So we just tried to encourage him to go back, and we went all the way to fourth grade, all the way through most of fourth grade. And every year we would try to think, well, maybe the next year will be better. He'll have a different teacher, there'll be different classmates, and so on and so forth. But it never got better. And then it reached a crisis in fourth grade, and that's when the principal's office. We were called into the principal's office a lot. I think the teachers thought this must be our fault, his parents' fault, and maybe it was. I mean, maybe it was. I mean, we treated him with a lot of respect. We liked to listen to him. We believe that he's capable of making a lot of his own decisions and does best when he's making his decisions. So he wasn't used to an environment where he's told what to do and has to do it that way if it doesn't make sense to him to do it that way. I mean, one of the things they complained about, believe it or not, was he thinks he's an adult. He acts like an adult. Oh, can you imagine that? How dare he act like an adult? So that's he would do he did very well on the test, but he always did his homework in a very different way than the teacher wanted him to do it because the way he explained it, that's the only way he could make it interesting. And he also would rebel in all sorts of ways that I'm sure were very confounding to the teacher. And I mean, you couldn't possibly run a typical school classroom with a bunch of kids like my son in it. It just would not work. You'd have to go to an entirely different model of school uh, because basically, you say to the classroom, uh, now children, will you all take out your pencils and start to do your do this worksheet? And he would say something like, "Well, thank you for asking, but no."
It was polite.
He would he would treat he would treat it as if it was a question rather than an order. It was phrased as a question. So, and they also had a policy at that time which they called the open door policy, which really didn't mean literally that you could go out the door whenever you wanted. But he took it that way. He said, "But I understand you have an open door policy, so I'm going home now." So and then when it came time, I maybe in third grade to learn how to use capital letters and punctuation, he decided that it was time to start writing like the poet E. E. Cummings, who would put capital letters and punctuation wherever he wished. So it was clearly rebellion, and he just was, whether it was doing it for his own sake to make life interesting there, or whether he was doing it truly to annoy the teacher, and I think it was probably the latter. He was that was it. So finally in fourth grade, it was kind of close to the end of fourth grade. It really reached a crisis point, and the school proposed that we have a meeting with him in the principal's office where there would be his teacher. There was an assistant teacher at the time, the principal, the assistant principal,
Oh God.
a school
Everybody.
psychologist, another psychologist that was brought in for, a regional psychologist for this, all of us would
Oh,
be
wow.
meeting together with my little son, 9 years old at that time. And the idea was we were all going to give him a message that he has to do what he's told to do in school, that he has no choice about it. And so we all said our piece in this uniform way, something like 7 or 8 big adults all standing up against little 9-year-old my little 9-year-old son, telling him what to do. And he looked at us all after we'd said our piece, and he said, "Go to hell."
Oh my God. Oh, I love this guy already. What a son. Were you proud or you were like, oh my goodness?
Yeah, so yeah, I looked at his mother, my late wife, and she looked at me, and we could see we both had tears in our eyes. And we knew at that moment that he had won and that we needed to be on his side, not against him. We needed to figure out some alternatives to school for him. We needed to, just as we respected him at home, we needed to, in other things, we needed to respect his opinion on this. And so that really changed my career because here's what then happened. We looked for alternative schools. We were living on what at that time, a fairly low salary of an assistant professor. And we couldn't really have afforded the typical private schools that existed in the area. We looked at some of them, although we may have been able to, some of them said that he could get a scholarship there, and so maybe we could afford it. But we would go even to these sort of progressive private schools, and he would say afterwards, "Well, you know, it's a nicer prison, but it's still a prison." And and then finally we went to this school that was located about 2 miles from where we lived then, which at that time was regarded as fairly easy walking distance for a 9 or 10-year-old kid. And we had resisted looking at it. I had always been curious, to be honest, in looking at it. His mother was not. She thought it was really too radically different kind of a school. But we finally went and looked at it and with our son. And he, after looking around, and he said something like, "Well, if this is true, if they're not just putting on a show here, this is what a school should be."
Oh,
And and so it turns out that his mother really adapted to the change even faster than I did, even though she was resistant in the beginning. Seeing him happy, and when he started going to the school, and he would come home happy instead of angry, it was such a relief. We had our little boy back again. We had, the happy, lively, curious, playful kid was back again. And so then when he started, so this is a school that is as different from typical school as you can imagine, and yet still be a school. It is necessarily in the United States a private school because there's no way anybody could get public money for a school this different from what schools are believed to be. But it's a school that accepts children from age 4 on through high school age. It does not segregate children by age. It does not assign children to any particular spaces. Children can go anytime, anywhere, and there are 2 buildings, anywhere in the buildings or on campus. It's adjacent to a forested state park, and kids can go there if they want. There's a pond on the 10-acre school campus. It's a lovely setting, but kids are just free to spend their time as they wish. The school is run officially and in reality, for the most part, by the school meeting, which consists of all the students, whether they're 4 years old or 18 years old, and staff members, no matter age. And of course, there are many, many more students than staff members. So each person has one vote, regardless of age. All the school rules are made at that meeting.
wow.
None of the rules have anything to do with education. They all have to do with just the kinds of rules you need for a fairly large group of people to get along with one another.
Mm.
Rules against littering, rules that if you take something out, you have to put it away, rules about there's a personal rights rule that says that if I'm doing something to you that you don't want me to do, you have to say no. And if I don't stop and you've said no in a serious tone of voice, I've violated your personal rights. So that's a big rule at the school that kind of prevents bullying. So those are just a sample of the rules. These are rules that are passed by vote of the kids, and they're enforced by judicial procedure. This sort of model after the jury system, the American jury system. So part of the actual philosophy of the founders of the school is that they wanted a school that that in which children have the rights and responsibilities of democratic citizens. The
Wow.
belief was if we're going to raise people to be democratic citizens in what, at least at that time, we thought of as America being a democratic society, they need to experience democracy as they're growing up, and the school is a place for them to experience democracy. The belief was that learning would take care of itself in a setting where children can follow their own interests, where there's lots of interesting things to do, where there's children of all ages doing various different things. The kids are going to figure out what they want to know, what they might need to know in their vision of their own life and future, and they'll learn it. And so that's the philosophy of the school.
Mm.
There are not even courses offered at the school, although if a group of kids decides that they want a course, they can organize one themselves and probably usually talk a staff member into leading it if they want a staff member to lead it. but it only goes as long as the kids want it.
Yeah.
And it's so in that sense, it's really, run by the kids, and the staff member is sort of just there at their request, but
Oh, I
so
see.
that and the staff members don't call themselves teachers because they don't believe they do any more teaching than anybody else. They don't even call themselves facilitators because, again, that sort of implies that they have a responsibility for helping the children learn, whereas they do help the children learn, but they don't want that to be kind of regarded as an official responsibility. That if a child asks them for help, they'll help just because this is part of being a human being and sharing and you try to help people when they ask for help. So but that's the way the school operates. So how did this change my career? It changed my career because, although I was very delighted that my son was delighted, and I wasn't too much worried about his learning. He's
Mhm.
just a kid who naturally learns no matter where he is. But, I was a little worried about this for him, that, suppose he stays there through what elsewhere would be called all of high school,
Yeah.
and then he decides, that he wants some career that requires going to college. Can he go to
Yeah.
college from such a school? And so I began to ask about that, and I got some sort of anecdotes and stories, and there were a few that, I learned about who had gone on to college. I was also a little concerned if you sort of walk through the school, not too surprisingly, where people are free, you see, kids doing a lot of art and music. And so I began to think, all right, do they all grow up to become starving artists and musicians
Yes.
living in
The
their
parent
parents'
worry.
basement because they can't make a living?
Yes.
You know, so and so that was also a little bit of a nagging concern I had.
Yeah.
And so I ended up doing a formal study of the graduates of the school. I first tried, this was
Wow.
not my field of research. I first tried to get some people in the School of Education at Boston College or at Harvard, where there were people at Harvard who claimed to be interested in democratic education. I thought they would be interested in
Mhm.
this school, but they weren't. But I couldn't get anybody to do the study. So I decided, well, this isn't my field, but if this study is going to be done, I guess I'm going to have to do it myself. And so
Oh, good on you,
with the
Peter.
help with the help of a part-time staff member at the school, David Chanoff, who helped to make contact with basically all the people we defined as graduates. So this was
Mm.
a long time ago, but the school had already been in existence at that time for about 12 or 13 years. So there were some kids who had left the school at graduation age to go on with life who had never done schooling anywhere else.
Mm.
But there were many others who had done part of their schooling there. And so we defined a graduate as anybody who was at the school for at least the last 2 years of what would have been called high school someplace else,
Yeah.
and then left the school for something other than more secondary education.
Yeah.
Um, that's the way we defined it. Now, most of them had been at that school at least through what would be the 4 years of high school uh, in another school. So none, so and as I said, a few of them had done all of their schooling there, and many of them had done all of their schooling since the age of about 12 there.
Mm.
So this was there were about close to 90 in that category at that time, even though the school was relatively small at that time. And that study is what changed my career because it was so interesting to find here are young people, young adults who had grown up without what we think of as school, grown up with something extraordinarily different from school, where they were truly trusted to take charge of their own education, truly trusted,
Yeah.
not nudged along the way, nobody coming and saying things like, well, don't you think it's time for you to learn to read now and things like that. No, not the staff at the school deliberately stopped doing that. Some parents might try to do it, but it doesn't work very well because the conflict between the message at home and the message at school. And so parents who keep their kids at the school learn to trust their kids for the most part and stop trying to direct their kids' education. So so the amazing thing is the these young adults were living very satisfying adult lives. Those who wanted to go to college, and this was the biggest surprise to me, went to college. I couldn't find anybody who wanted to go to college who didn't. They all got into college if they wanted to. In one sense, in retrospect, that's not too surprising. In the United States, even though everybody worries about their kid getting into college, the truth of the matter is anybody can go to college. And the way you can
Ah,
do it is to go first to a community college, which will literally accept anybody. It's inexpensive. It's a 2-year college if you stay for the total, but you can go there and take courses, and they count as college courses. And
right.
so some kids did it by just going to a community college to take a few courses or maybe even to go for a year or two, and then they would transfer to a 4-year liberal arts college. But there were others, a fair number, who went directly to a 4-year college without ever having, including in a couple of cases, without ever having taken a course before they went to college, any kind of formal education course, never having taken a test, an academic test, until they took the SAT test, that is the scholastic aptitude test that some colleges require for admissions, and some of them who went to a fairly elite college took that test as a way of getting in. They prepared themselves for that test. It's not terribly hard to do if you really are motivated to do it. And so
That's
my
interesting,
concern
isn't
about
it?
going to college was set aside. They went on to college at about the same high level as kids from the public school that my son had left.
And did you
And
research the jobs that they were getting after college? Was there any difference in careers?
so that's a good question. Um, there were, I have to say, a slightly disproportionate number of kids in music and art. Not too
Of course.
not too surprising. But
Yeah.
amazingly, they were good enough that they were making pretty good living at it. One or two of them were
Wow.
actually rather famous. One
Amazing.
of them was quite a famous pop star at the time, and another was part of a major orchestra, a famous orchestra. Um, another was a leading uh, theater director, and so they, when you really spend a lot of time on your music and art and whatever it is you're interested in, you get good
Yeah,
at it. It turns
absolutely.
out you can actually make a living at these things that most people have difficulty making a living at. But
Ah,
to my satisfaction, because although my son was interested in music and art, I don't think he was interested in that as a career at any point. But to my satisfaction, there were graduates in every realm that we regard as important in the culture. There were graduates who were in the service professions. In that particular group, there were no doctors. There was a couple of nurses, but a little bit later, there were some graduates who became doctors. There were graduates who became lawyers. There were many graduates who founded their own businesses, were
I was going to ask
successful.
that question because I feel like
One-
a lot of kids that don't fit into traditional schooling are the future entrepreneurs, the business owners.
Yeah, yeah. So what you didn't find is, not surprisingly, they went into careers where they still have a lot of self-direction possibility,
Yes.
where they're kind of in charge, continue to be in charge of their own lives. So you didn't have people becoming kind of like middle managers in business, where you're sort of shuffling papers and a cog in a larger wheel. The ones who went into business either got into a small business where they could play a major role in running it, or more often founded their own business. Yeah, interestingly, one of the graduates in this study, and this, as I say, was a long time ago, this was at the time really when the home computer was just becoming available was when I did this study. So you can see how long ago this was. So so one of the students at the school who was one of the who was one of the graduates that I interviewed. So he had been a student earlier than when I did this study. Had, by his claim, been kicked out of public school. That he had consistently failed. He had been a total failure in school, and that he was expelled from public school. I'm not honestly sure if that's completely true, or if it's just his way of saying it, because I'm not sure that it's legal to prevent somebody from going to public school. But
Okay.
but at any rate, I believe him that he was a terrible student there. He came to Sudbury Valley. He was something like, I forget exactly what, 11 or 12 years old. But for whatever reason, he was really interested in computers. And the school at that time did not have any computers.
Mm.
And so one of the things that the school does is they have what they call corporations, which are really special interest groups. So kids who have a particular interest in something, that sort of like they form a club and they lobby with the school meeting to get equipment related to what they're interested in. So the sports corporation lobbies for, repaving the outside basketball court, or getting,
Yeah.
getting new bats for baseball, or whatever it is that they want. The music corporation lobbies for a better soundproof room so people will stop complaining when they're playing their music loud. So
Yeah.
so he started um, the computer corporation. So he got together. Now, remember, kids, he made himself president of the computer corporation, and then he, probably I imagine about 12 years old, began calling local computer companies in the Boston area and introducing himself as the president of the computer corporation of the Sudbury Valley School. And we're extraordinarily interested in your particular type of computer as a vehicle for learning for our students at our school. And we're wondering if you could donate us a computer. And he managed to collect 2 or 3 computers that way. And
Oh, I
he
love
figured out how to use them. And he was the one, like a 12-year-old kid, who brought the whole idea of computers, brought the school into the computer era.
wow.
Now, that kid went on, and by the time he graduated, he had been a software developer. He started a software company. He claims, so most of the students weren't making a lot of money, and I don't think that they had any particular goal in making money. And I don't know if this young person did or not, but he told me at this time, back when $1 million was actually a lot of money, he
Yeah.
said, my computer is over the $1 million mark now. My software company, and my biggest client, he said, is the school that kicked me out.
Oh my God. Like, oh my goodness, Peter, you
So that,
highlighted
that's
so
just
many
one
things
story,
there.
of course. I could tell a lot of stories like that. And of course, it's just, one kid. This doesn't tell you what happens with everybody by any means. But it gives a sample of what can happen in this kind of a school.
I love that.
Kids discover what they're interested in. They get passionate about what they're interested in. They often become very good at it. And very frequently, they're able to find careers in which they're making a living doing what they love to do. And how lucky they are that they can do that compared to other kids who are spending all their time growing up doing what other people are telling them to do. And they don't really have the opportunity to really figure out who they are, what they're interested in, what their passions are. And then they just kind of blindly go on to college and choose some career, maybe because it sounds prestigious or somebody recommends it to them, but they aren't necessarily passionate about it. That's a very different life trajectory than the life trajectory of kids who are involved in self-directed education. And that's really what I discovered even in that first study at the Sudbury Valley School. And it's an idea that has been, kind of motivated a lot of my work
Thanks
since.
for sharing that, Peter. I just want to start by saying I can imagine you had to really tap into, I guess, the side of you that needs to be brave, pulling your child out of a school, because I mean, I've been through that and I know that you have conflict in your brain, like, oh, we'll just keep, pushing through it. Come on, you're going to build resilience if you can stay in the school. But realistically, there comes a point where happiness is just a lot more important, right? So well done
Right,
for being brave and being such an incredible parent to take that risk and that jump and that leap of faith.
right.
It sounds like you've just, wow, your son obviously has got so much from that style of learning. What would you say? Because I know there will be a lot of parents listening here that are in that situation where they keep hoping that things will get better. And they all see these other styles of learning. But as a parent, we don't want to make a mistake, do we? We're like, where is the biggest mistake here? Is it more of a mistake to leave them in traditional schooling, or do we just need to go and try something else?
Yeah, I think that I think it takes, for most people, it takes a lot of courage to do something, especially with your kids, that's different
Mm,
from what the majority of people are doing. Um, a later study that we did was a study of unschooling parents. And among other things, we asked them the question, what's the most difficult thing about unschooling for you? And, one might think, well, maybe, having my kids home all the time or having to live on one income, or if it's a single parent, having to deal with a job and my kids at home. You might think that was it. No, far and away, the biggest problem was overcoming their fears about the criticisms that they believed they were getting or really were getting
mm.
from other people for
Oh,
doing
yeah.
this thing with their kids, even maybe
Yes.
from the parents' own parents who think that these parents are just ruining the lives of their grandchildren, that, "Well, how could you do this?" I mean, we are we have, in Australia, I'm sure, and certainly in the United States, we come from several generations of everybody going to school, of most
Yeah.
people going to school, right? So we just believe that schooling is just part of growing up. You can't really grow up and go on and become an adult without going to school. How could you?
Mm,
That's in everybody's head. A little less so now with change, but certainly, the time that my wife and I were making this decision, that was pretty much in everybody's head. You have to go to school. We are creatures of norms. For good evolutionary reasons, we tend to do what other people in our culture do. I mean,
yeah.
if other people are doing it, that must be the right thing to do. Otherwise they wouldn't. Otherwise they'd be doing something else, right? And so, in many realms, this is true. So you don't want to just willy-nilly act randomly. You want to behave kind of in the way other people do. Human society depends upon that.
Mm.
Everybody's at least in the United States, everybody's driving on the left side of the street. You don't want to just decide to drive on the right side of the street, right? So, this would just create chaos. It would ruin you. So we are creatures of norms, and the norm is to send your child to school. And so unless there's something about your own mental set, your own courage as a parent, your own convictions that really overrides that, the temptation is to keep that kid in school as long as you possibly can,
Mm.
to fight the child, to think there's something wrong. There's a diagnostic category called school refusal. Now,
Yes.
my son might have been diagnosed with that, but it's treated as a psychological disorder. The way you deal with that is to take the kid to a psychologist who helps the child overcome this irrational fear, called
Wow.
school phobia. This is actually a diagnosis in the United States and in the UK. There's been a lot written about this in the UK. And so so it's regarded as normal to go to school. It's regarded as abnormal. It's regarded as a problem with the child that the child has to overcome if the child refuses or doesn't want to go to school. So this is difficult. So I think the way that people overcome it, first of all, is to really think it through, to really look at number one, at this point, it's easier to make the decision because there are studies, including mine, done that shows it works. It's not a big gamble. It works, at least as well as the others as the traditional school does, if not better, depending on how you define as well or better. And the other thing that I think a lot of parents would help a lot of parents is to realize this decision is not irreversible.
That's
You can
right.
take your child out of school and they can still go back to school. And there are a lot of people who take their child out for homeschooling or unschooling. And then for one reason or another, it's not usually the poor parents who make this decision. If it does, it's often a problem. But for one reason or another, the child decides they want to go back to school. And I've heard many examples of this. So the child maybe was taken out of school for homeschooling at, let's say, in third grade. And then in fifth grade, the child decides, or sixth grade, the child decides, my friends are going to school. I really want to see what school is like now. I'd like to go back to school. And and in the great majority of cases, the child goes back at whatever grade they would be at. And even though they haven't been studying the same subjects, they go back and they're not really behind.
Mm.
And the reason they're not really behind is nobody really remembers what they learned from one grade to the next anyway. This is
That is
just
so
true.
true.
This is just absolutely true. So the extreme case of this that I know of is a family who told me, unschooling family, they told me they really didn't believe in school and they never sent their child to school. And then when the child was of the age to go to third grade, the child said, I want to go to school. And of course, if you really respect your child, you respect your child on this too. You listen to them. You say, okay, you can try it. Remember, you can always leave if you want. But in this case, the mom said to the child, well, in third grade, everything is about reading, and you don't know how to read. I don't see how you can go to third grade. They'll probably put you in first grade because you don't know how to read. And so he said, according to the mom's report, all right, I'll learn how to read. And so he took a couple of weeks, learned how to read, and went to school in third grade.
Look
So
at that. That's
it
incredible.
turns out learning how to read isn't that difficult if you really want to do it. So that's so it's not irreversible. There are a lot of families that I hear of, but the kids kind of go in and out of school. They go to school for a little while and then they get tired of school and they start homeschooling and they go again to school for another
Yeah.
couple of grades.
I feel that's going to make people feel
There's
better.
some kids who don't go to school until high school, and oftentimes the reason given for that is you know, I'm 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 not meeting a lot of people that I would like to date, here at
I wouldn't
homeschooling
about,
or
yeah, with the
at
teenagers.
this little free school I'm going to. So I
Yeah.
really want to be part of the social scene of high school. And I like the idea of a high school prom and all of that. And then there are a few who get very serious about some sports and they want to go to school so they can be on a real varsity sports team that plays formal games with other schools, not just the kind of pickup fun games that you would be doing at Sudbury Valley. So there's a variety of reasons people go, but they just go,
I
they
love
fit in.
that. It's so good
In a
you've
way,
kind of,
that's no different from what I said about college. Think of the
yeah.
kids who are going to college and they've never taken a course before.
Kids are
So
adaptable, aren't they?
one of the things I asked them in this initial study, and for those some of them we just surveyed by paper and pencil, but some of them we interviewed who lived in the area still. And I would ask, so you went to college, you were majoring in biology, but you had never taken a biology course in high school. So there you were in a college biology course, and everybody else had taken high school biology. Was that a problem for you? And if if so, in what way was it a problem? And they periodically would say, "Well, I was a little worried about it," but it turned out that the professor really starts from the beginning, and moreover, if he uses some word that I don't know that maybe the other kids would know from high school, I just look it up, you know? So and today, of course, that's even easier to do than it would have been then. You just Google it. The
Mm.
professor's been talking about meiosis. What the heck is meiosis? I'll Google it. Ah, that's what meiosis is. So the so they didn't find it to be difficult. Most of them said they really felt they were an advantage over the other students there because first of all, if they decided to go to college, it was their own decision. They wanted to be there. They weren't there because they felt they were pressured there by their parents, and they wanted to get the most out of it. And secondly, they had been responsible for their own education all along. And so in college, where you don't have somebody always looking over your shoulder telling you exactly what to do, and you have to kind of manage your own life a little bit more because you're unfortunately, the mom is there now on the cell phone, but
Yes.
but not there right over your shoulder anyway. But the teachers aren't following you around telling you just exactly what to do. They give you an assignment, and then you do it or you don't do it, and if you don't do it, you fail, right? I mean, so
Mm.
you kinda have to take a certain amount of responsibility, and these people at Sudbury Valley were used to taking responsibility, planning their days, figuring things out, learning how to learn what they needed to know, taking initiative. And and those advantages outweighed any disadvantage that they might have experienced from some kind of lack of knowledge of information that
Mm.
was taught in high
Yeah, that's
school.
awesome. Oh my goodness, I love that so much. You mentioned, school refusal. We are seeing a massive increase in issues with children with mental health stuff going on. Is Do you feel like this increase in depression, anxiety, and stuff is down to school in some way? In kids being stuck in that old way of doing things?
Well, w- w- uh, I think there's no doubt but what this is true. So I can't speak directly about Australia, but research in the United States and also in the UK, and also it turns out in Sweden, where I was just recently looking at research, shows that the recent increases in anxiety, depression, even suicide among teenagers are clearly linked to the changes in school policy that came with, in the United States, what's called the Common Core curriculum. In the UK, with what's called the School Reform. That in the United States, this began in 2012, between 2010 and 2013. There was a massive change in how schooling works, where
Mm.
students were given, there was more testing, there was a reduction in the choices of courses, but most significantly, there was a huge loss of autonomy for teachers. Teachers had to teach the core curriculum, and
Mm.
then in most schools, there were people making sure they were all on the same page at the same time. So teachers were not free to try to change what they're doing in ways that engage the children more. And the stress of schooling greatly increased because everything began to depend upon scores on these standardized tests. Even teachers are being evaluated and judged based on how the students score. So the teaching is to the task. The lessons became more and more boring, more and more fragmented. You Instead of reading whole books for fun, you would read paragraphs and then respond to them because that's the way you'd be tested on at the end of the year. So the pressures of school greatly increased. There are studies showing, for example, let me just give you one example, and this is with teenagers. In the United States, the American Psychological Association every periodically does a study that they call Stress in America. It's a survey of, and usually it's a survey, it's a demographically balanced survey in which they ask the survey respondents questions about their experience of stress, how stressed have you been, and what are the causes of stress. Normally, they do it just with adults, but in 2009 and then again in 2013, they included school-age teenagers, 13 to 17-year-olds, and what they found is in 2013, which was after Common Core took effect, um, teenagers came out as the most stressed group in America, more so than any group of adults. And 83% of them cited school as a source of their stress. Nothing else came close to that. Nothing else came close.
That's
Now,
crazy.
what's interesting is in 2009, just by coincidence, the previous time they had done it had been just before Common Core began. And it wasn't that they were testing the effects of Common Core. It was just coincidence that they did this study with teens in 2009 and again in 2013. In 2009, the same kind of study, the same questions. Still, school came out on top, but it was only 43% who said school was a major source of stress, not 83%. So the number of teens saying school was a major source of their distress doubled between as a result of Common Core. I'm convinced of that. I'm writing a book about this and other similar changes right now. Very similar thing happened in the UK, especially in England, because this school change only occurred in England, but England comprises most of the UK population-wise. And there, the education change occurred in 2015, so a little bit later than in the United States. And in the UK, that's when the spike in anxiety and depression among teens occurred, timed with the change in schooling. So when a nation changes schooling in such a way as to make it more pressured, take away what little choices were already present, take away teachers' autonomy. I mean, teachers, for the most part, I do a lot of speaking to groups of teachers. I know a lot of teachers. My sister was a teacher for many years. Teachers are generally good people.
Absolutely.
They like kids. They're in it because they like kids. And good teachers, especially longtime teachers, can often figure out ways to accommodate at least some of the individual needs and differences among the kids. But now, with these so-called reforms, teachers are not free to do that. They've got an administrator telling them exactly what they have to be doing on that day. No, you can't be having an intellectual discussion about this issue that was raised yesterday. Today, you've got to be studying page 89 of the book and doing workshops A, B, C, and D. This is what happened with my sister and the school she was teaching at when Common Core began to occur. She had been a very successful teacher for 22 years, happily teaching. Kids were happy. When this started, she became so depressed. She could see the kids were unhappy that she took a leave of absence for depression, and then she resigned after that. She said, "There's no way I can go back. I can't even go back for the 2 or 3 more years I would need to go back for to be eligible for a full pension." She just couldn't stand doing it. Now, there were a lot of good teachers who quit as a result of that. This is even more true among kindergarten teachers because the effects were even more dramatic at the kindergarten and, believe it or not, even at the pre-kindergarten level, where people began forcing little children to sit in their seats and do worksheets and do tests. You began to have standardized tests of kindergartners and their ability to use numbers. I mean, this is absolutely, there's no question of
Soul
what it's challenging.
destroying.
And so absolutely. Now there's a belief, the common belief that the rise in anxiety, depression, suicide, and so on, beginning around 2010 and continuing up until now, is the result of kids being on social media so much. Um, this is not true. I have really examined the data. Nobody who really does this research believes that's true. They've every there have actually been hundreds of studies, and none of them show overall a clinically meaningful correlation between time on social media, time on this is what we want to say as a society because nobody wants to say at school. Nobody wants to say at school. It's easier to blame those greedy social media companies and technology companies. And now I do want to step back and say, yeah, there are some kids who are suffering from it, and there are some adults who are suffering from it.
Mm.
But it's a small number, and most kids are benefiting from it more than they're suffering from it. It's a means of keeping in touch with your friends, it's a means of play,
Yeah.
it's a means of gaining information. It's the most powerful educational vehicle that's ever been invented, and kids use it for these purposes. But but this is so people have but the evidence is overwhelming. And here's another piece of evidence. Now I said that this rise in anxiety, depression, and even suicide occurred in the United States, and it correlates with Common Core. It occurred in the UK, and it correlates with their changes in education. In the entire European Union, taken as a whole, all the European Union, uh, EU countries taken together, there was no increase in anxiety, depression, or suicide over those years. They're not
Wow.
deprived of social media. They're not deprived of cell phones. They're on it as much as kids anywhere else in the world. But they did not have these changes in schooling that occurred in the United States and in the UK. Now, I
Peter, why
can't
is this
speak to
being ignored? Like, why, if the evidence is there, are
this is
schools
the
taking it
question I keep
seriously?
asking. This is the question. This is why I'm writing a book on it, and I hope the book gets it out there.
Mm.
But I'm trying to write a book showing how over time, excuse me, I got a bit of a cold. Over time, children's mental health goes up and down in relationship to what's happening in schools.
Mm.
And it shouldn't be surprising to us. Why should this be surprising to anybody? Children spend more time in school than anywhere else except home.
Yeah.
And anybody should see that school is a stressful situation. It is a place where you're not free, even in the best of schools, unless it's Sudbury Valley, you're not free. You are micromanaged, you're constantly being evaluated, you're being compared to your peers. You're in a setting where you have to ask for permission to go to the bathroom, you know? This is a setting that no sane adult would possibly accept for themselves. Nobody would take a job that
No.
no for no amount of money would you take a job for where the conditions are like that. And yet that's where we send our kids.
Mm.
That's where we send our kids.
It sounds
And
like you are doing some
and we
extremely
want to
important
think
work.
and we want to keep a halo around school. We want to think of school as only good.
Mm.
And so even that APA study that I described, why didn't the American Psychological Association talk about that? I had to dig out the data. It's there.
Yeah.
But there were no articles saying 83% of kids say school is what's stressing out. They did not publish that. They did not publish it. It's there. It's there when you look at the data. And there are other studies showing the same thing. In Europe, there are some people beginning to publish these relationships. And I'm happy to see that there is a correlation between school pressure and children's levels of anxiety and depression.
Mm.
But it's still, somebody finds a tiny, clinically not even meaningful correlation between the amount of time that girls, it turns out to be only significant for girls, even in the tiny amount, it doesn't occur for boys, a tiny significant correlation when you're looking at thousands and thousands of cases. So it takes a tiny effect to be statistically significant. Correlation between time on social media and self-reports of depression. It accounted for less than 1% of the variance. This study led to headlines about how social media causes depression. Now, first of all, everybody who knows anything about this knows that that effect was so small that it was not clinically significant. Secondly, this is a correlation, and you can't infer cause and effect from a correlation. It may well be if there is a relationship between depression and use of social media, maybe kids are using social media to deal with depression. And
Yes.
so, in fact, there are some longitudinal studies showing that's exactly true, that some kids who get depressed start using social media. They don't feel quite up to meeting with others in person, but second best, meet them online, talk with other people. And some of them are using social media to deal with the depression, to look for help with their depression, to find groups talking about how to deal with depression. So, we always imagine the worst in what teenagers and kids are doing. And when we actually talk with them and we actually ask them to describe what we're doing, we find that they're not so stupid,
Yeah.
that they're often using this stuff for benefit.
Oh,
So this is a real problem. We are a society, at least in the United States and most of the developed world, where nobody wants to criticize school. If kids aren't adapting to school, it's not the school's fault in everybody's mind. It's the parents' fault, or it's the kids' fault, or the kids have some kind of brain damage and they need some kind of therapy or drugs in order to correct the biological fault that they have. We keep diagnosing more and more kids as having disorders of one sort or another. And the more I look into these, the more I see they're really school induced, or they're disorders. If you call them disorders, that really result from the fact that schools simply can't accommodate the full range of normal human personalities. If you're a normal boy, and this is more true for boys and girls, who just finds it hard to sit still,
I've got
for
one of
long
those.
periods of time,
Yes.
or to or to do meaningless stuff that you're told to do. And if you're that, you're likely to get in the United States at least, a diagnosis of ADHD. So in the past these would just be regarded as restless kids, but you'd have more recesses, and you would just accept the fact that there's some kids who are just kind of squirmy. But now we consider it to be a disorder. It's a diagnosed disorder, and in some cases, many cases, treated with powerful drugs that have probably long-term harmful effects on the brain.
Oh, Peter, I could speak to you all day about this subject. I've got one last question to wrap this
Sure.
up, and I'm so interested to hear more about your book when it comes out. And once it does, we will definitely pop it all over our social media and ensure that everyone can see where it is, see where to buy it. But if I was to give you a megaphone to the world, to all the parents and all the educators out there, what would you say right now?
Well, boy, there's so many things but I would say to most educators and parents, start trusting kids. Um, Start trusting kids' instincts. Stop thinking that kids are stupid. Kids are biologically designed to educate themselves. And what they need is the opportunities to do so. And that requires freedom and opportunity. It doesn't require restraint.
Oh, the perfect message.
Hmm.
Thank you so, so much for your time. The work that you've been doing, I feel, is so necessary. And I know that you already have had an amazing impact. Do you have the name of your book and when that will be released, or not quite yet?
So we still don't know the name of the book for sure. I've been tentatively calling it Restoring Childhood, because my conception of childhood is a conception that is how children have lived throughout time when they're free to be children. And we've largely taken childhood away in our culture. And so the book is about how we've taken childhood away and what we need to do to bring it back. Bring back children's abilities to play, to explore, to socialize with other kids, to get into trouble and find their way out of trouble, because that's part of growing up, to be ever more independent as they're growing up, because that's how they learn to be grown-ups. This is kind of what the book is about. The publishing company at this point is calling it Free to Play because they want to play on the title of my previous book,
Yeah.
Free to Learn. But I tell them it's not just about play, and so we still have to decide exactly what the title will be.
Good luck with that. It's always hard to get a title.
Right.
Thank you. Keep changing the world, Peter. It's been an absolute pleasure. For anyone that's listening to this today, head to the show notes, and all of Peter's details for his website, all of his social media and his books will be there as well. And obviously subscribe. Peter, thanks again.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep thinking bigger about what's possible. I'm Liz Volpe. See you on the next episode of Generation Inspired. Follow the podcast so you don't miss what's coming next.